Welcome to Righteous Minds. We are so excited. This day has finally arrived. We've been talking about this and discussing it for a while, an idea that we had. And so we're so excited that the day has finally arrived. And so we are Righteous Minds, where we are.
Tending the mind and nurturing the soul.
I love that. Every time I hear that out loud, it just really just resonates with me. Tending the mind, nurturing the soul. And that's something that we really, really need to do, especially in today's societies. But nevertheless, we're pretty excited about today. So we're welcome you for joining us, for even taking the time to click and say, what these two chicks talking about today. So we're pretty excited. This is our very first episode. This episode is going to be our introductory episode and really just kind of help you get to know us and our story of how, you know, for over 20 something years, there was this separation, but how we've come together with the same mindset, uh, in the interest of individuals being healed holistically, uh, and that happening by, you're integrating, you're connecting, you're uniting mental health and spiritual health so that you have holistic health. And so I'm pretty excited. Again, this is our first episode, and so we're trying to make sure we, dot our I's and cross our T's. So we hope that you have some grace for us as we go on this journey. I tell my sister, I said, listen, I'm a half a century years old talking about out in these streets, talking about I'm gonna start a podcast, but nevertheless, she persisted.
Yeah.
But with that being said, we're going to kind of talk about what is righteous minds. First, we want to thank everyone who helped us. Melissa, she came up with the name with we put in a number of names in which we ask you all to help us decide which name it would be, and righteous minds bubbled to the top. And so we're so thankful for your engagement. One thing about it, that one nugget, Melissa's going to tell you a little bit more about Righteous Minds. But one thing I want to say, what's interesting, as we were initially, Righteous Mind wasn't my like top one, but over time, a couple things kind of bubbled up. First, like literally a few weeks ago, I was doing my notes and doing some studying and realized that, wait a minute, Righteous Minds, Regina, Melissa, what? What? But then another thing that struck me the other day is that I am Regina Marie and she is Melissa Renee.
Wow. Okay. I hadn't even thought about that.
I know, when I thought about that, I was like, oh my goodness. Okay, so Righteous Minds, I'm totally sold.
Our M is in.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. But Righteous Minds is our name, and so we're so excited that you're here. Melissa, you want to give us a little tidbit about Righteous Minds and what kind of made you come up with it to even put it in the list?
So I think I really was just thinking from a spiritual standpoint, where the Bible talks about God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. And so for me, Righteous Minds is about the renewing of the mind. It is about bringing the mind into spiritual unity with the body and with the spirit. It is about transforming how we live, or our actions, by changing how we think, and dealing with the emotional our emotional state. So for me, it was kind of like, you use the word holistic. It's bringing the mind, body, and spirit into unity, and us being able to function in the way that God created us, so that we truly worship him.
I love that. And it's a couple things that you were saying that, talking about Righteous Minds. When I thought about Righteous Minds, the first thing I was concerned, I didn't want people to think like Righteous Minds, what, oh, they righteous? No. This is a journey. This is a journey to be better. But when I was thinking about righteous minds, the big thing about our minds is so powerful. We don't give our minds as much credit as as we should,
Mhm.
and it makes me think about the scripture where he says, be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, because our mind is so powerful.
Mhm.
When we put our mind to anything, we can do it. We really, really, we can do things. But oftentimes there are so many things that impact how we process thoughts, how we receive thoughts. And so those are some of the things we're probably going to be talking about, as we go on this journey together.
Right.
But yes, that's where, again, we're righteous minds. So with that being said, we're hoping, as if you go on this journey with us, that righteous minds will begin to resonate from a standpoint of how you view yourself and what your journey is like, and about
Mhm.
transforming. And you know if you're a person who see the glass half full, that over the journey you'll begin to be a person to see the glass that is not half empty but half full.
Mhm.
So with that, we're going to get ready to get on into some things. So first, we're going to do some introductions. And
Yes.
so I'm excited to introduce to you. I said her name, but you don't know that her name is just not all. It's so much more to her. But this young woman, I found out about her when I was 5 years old. My mom informed me, that I would be getting a sister. And I think one of the moments that kind of definitely stick out to me was, I remember, waking up one morning, you know, you gotta get ready for school, and like no one had woke me up, and I go around and I'm like, mommy, mommy, and needless to say, my mom wasn't there, her dad wasn't there. Of course, I started to get really scared, and the neighbor called and said, hey, your mom went into labor in the middle of the night, and she's at the hospital having your sister. So we're going to come over and take you to school and then take you up to the hospital afterwards. So that's how I learned about this lovely woman. Um, Over the years, I would say that from watching her when she was young, she was she was, I'm telling you, so particular and so meticulous. And it's so funny that even as I see her now, she is very, very similar. And what I want to say is that reuniting with her and learning about her as a woman, um, she doesn't know how much she impacts me. So I'm so excited to even what she's accomplished. It's just such a powerful testimony. But let me stop before I start crying. It's such a powerful and beautiful testimony of how God is the God of restoration. But nevertheless, I want to introduce you Miss Melissa Renee, who is a licensed professional counselor. Give it up for my girl.
Woo. I'll give it up for myself as well. Thank you. Thank
Yes,
you.
yes.
I appreciate that. And I want to introduce this lovely lady who is my big sister, who I have had the wonderful opportunity of seeing be a mother to her children, um, be involved very heavily in her church, and have such a huge church family and church community, support young adults, support women in particular. Um, I just admire your boldness. I admire your openness, your honesty. I know that whatever you tell me is truth. You don't mix your words. You don't hold back. You give people what they need. I've seen you be so caring, so compassionate, so loving, so giving over the years. And it has so blessed my soul to just watch you nurture and care for people everywhere, from all walks of life. You don't know a stranger, and you don't hesitate to give of yourself to people who are in need. And so I want to introduce this lovely woman, who is my inspiration, my muse, my guiding light, my big sister, Regina. Making faces and everything.
Listen, why you out in these streets trying to make my eyes sweat?
Listen, you asked me to introduce you. I'm gonna go out.
Oh
Okay.
my gosh. Thank you so much. Oh
Yeah.
my God. She over here trying to make me cry out the gate. The devil is a lie.
Yes,
Uh,
indeed.
Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. But we are Regina and Melissa. I am the oldest. Yes, I am. But I'll tell you now, the interesting thing is she is the more serious one, the more
Uh-huh.
reserved one. I
Hmm.
am the goofy one, so you guys can judge me all you want. It's okay. But right now, what we want to do is we want to pivot. We want to, get our journey started. And our journey
Hmm.
starts of how we got here. I want to set the table. So, in setting the table, what I want to say is a couple things. As we begin to share information about some of our experiences, please understand that we still, those individuals who, whatever season they were in, and these are the experiences that we were on the receiving end. It may not have been their intent, but ultimately we understand it's not always about intent; it's about impact. We want you to know that we still love them, we still care for them, we extend grace for them, so as you hear these, sometimes when we hear things that maybe we have done those things, or maybe what if, I oftentimes we hear things from the perspective of how we would want someone to respond if we behave that way. And so I want to give that disclaimer to say that, we it's not a bashing, it's just oftentimes we have to be honest and transparent and authentic, and that is what we're going to do here. So with that being said, um we like I said, I was there when my sister was born. As a kid, I probably wasn't the best little sister. She came in on the scene like trying to steal my shine. Like, come on, who told y'all to have her like 6 years later, bro? I've been doing this. I've been in these streets handling this space. How dare y'all?
Right.
So definitely I imagine, some behaviors that a kid who for the most part was the only kid in the house. But what I would say is that I took care of her. I fed her. I changed her diapers. She was with me 24/7. It was a thing that she would say when when she was getting in trouble. She would say, "Regina, gone." I don't know why she said that, but whenever she was going to get in trouble, she was like, "Regina, gone."
Hmm.
But being with her as a little person, and then when I became a teenager, and it's so crazy, definitely, they say hindsight is 2020. If I known what would occur, not many years after I went into my teen years, I definitely would have probably appreciated and was probably would have been far more attentive in the spaces. Because I remember, once I became a teenager, she would ask me, "Regina, come outside and play." And I was like, "No, I don't want to come outside and play." And I can
Hmm.
remember one last time where I probably went out to play with her. And I can remember myself going outside reluctantly. And I
Hmm.
sat on our brick fence. You remember on 94th Street? I sat on
Hmm.
our brick fence, and I was sitting there looking around, and she was playing whatever. And then I was like, "I'm not doing this." And I went back in the house. But Lord knows, I tell you, I wish I could take those times back. But God is the God of restoration. But I say that to say that, unfortunately, a large stint of our, definitely her formative years as a teenager and most of my 20s and 30s, we were separated, unfortunately, for at least 20 plus years in which we weren't connected. And so,
Hmm.
what I would say is that there are some things that we experienced. I experienced during my time when I was in the
Hmm.
house, and then there were things that she experienced. So, with that being said, I've set the table. And although I'm the oldest person, I'm going to let her go first and say what was part of her journey, part one, to get her to this moment.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate how you started it, how you set the table. I'm ready to dine. We are coming from a place of vulnerability. and sharing our unique stories. And I definitely appreciate you also including that, we do love those people and we do still care for those people. Um, and this is a vulnerable moment for the both of us to be able to share these things. But going back to what you said, my teen adolescent years were filled with a lot of neglect, a lot of violence or witnessing of violence. It was filled with a lot of um, just kind of what I would say separation or disconnection, not really having the type of relationships that I needed to have to help me to grow, to help me to develop into a healthy person, experiencing situations where my basic needs weren't met, experiencing situations where I witnessed people fighting and arguing, and engaging in behaviors towards each other that were not safe for me, that didn't allow me to feel safe. Um, and then the messaging that comes out of those experiences where anytime you're a young child and your basic needs are not met, you begin to feel that you're not important, you don't matter. You begin to feel unseen. So there were a lot of moments in my childhood and in those stages of my life where I felt very unseen. I spent a lot of time by myself, and just really trying to navigate an environment that was not safe, situations that were not safe, experiences that were not safe, and doing that all in a child's mind, in a child's brain. How do you know what's safe or not when it hasn't been modeled for you? And so those were a lot of my formative experiences, and so many changes that were unexpected, things that I really didn't understand, that were happening before me, that I was just kind of like, I don't know why this is happening. One day it was like this, and then the next day it was like that. I can remember multiple moves. I can remember going to multiple schools. Um, and again, just not having any control over all of the things that were happening to me, that were happening, that that I didn't know why they were happening. But then, aside from not knowing why they were happening, I had no control over it, whether I could stop them or any of that. So I can remember not really learning a lot of autonomy, not really knowing how
Mm.
to handle things, because the way I saw people handling things were with anger and violence. So I didn't really experience a lot of things that built my self esteem or things that helped me to uh, feel confident or feel capable, or any of those types of things. It was just really a lot of me left to depend on people that, unfortunately, and as you mentioned earlier, they were not equipped at that particular point in their lives. They were experiencing their own personal struggles with addiction and with so many other things. So, while it may not have been intentional, like you said, it had a huge impact on how I saw myself, how I saw other people, and how I saw the world, basically.
Wow. I mean, that's that's a lot. So I want to ask a couple questions.
Hmm.
Because um you said a lot. In those times where you felt alone, I mean, was there an opportunity to try to reach out? Did you ever try to reach out, to connect to me to see if, like, if I could come? Because at that point I was out of the house. Um, did you ever try, or were you discouraged or anything?
I think I just felt a lot of abandonment. I felt that I had to pretty much go along with whatever was happening in the environment, with the people that were responsible for my care, because that was the safest choice for me. I had been given so many different narratives about, other people in the family, and those narratives kind of were like, well, no, nobody's gonna come and get you, nobody's gonna take care of you. You just have to be here with me, kind of a thing, or be here with us. And so, um, as a young kid, none of those other options even seemed like they were feasible. You know what I'm saying? They never seemed like they were going to be realistic or feasible, for lack of a better word. So I had to make sure that I wasn't rocking the boat, or I wasn't creating any, because that's the thing with family dysfunction, is when there's
Mhm.
family dysfunction, um, it kind of brings in this kind of codependent way of being, where how you feel is how I feel, and what you think
Mm.
is what I think. And there's no room for individuation or individuality. And so I grew up in an environment where I had to just ascribe to the beliefs and the thoughts of the people who were caring for me. And if I went against that, it was not going to go well for me. It was going to create more problems. And so I just kind of had to feel the way they felt and think the way they thought, because that was safer for me.
And as you say that, I mean, what I would say is that I've said it before that I feel we both have experienced trauma in that household. Uh, I think even though mine is different from yours,
Hmm.
but the impact is still left indelible marks.
Hmm.
Um, and even as I hear you say that you felt like, basically, what do you mean? I'm the only person who's going to take care of you. I definitely understand that because those are the things that I was told as well. But I just want to tell you, Melissa, I wish I could get Anthony, my ex husband, on the phone with you because when I say so many times, I had so many conversations. There's so many times I wanted to figure out, like, I used to ask questions. I used to say, like, well, because I knew the circumstances, and I will say, and I'm not making excuses for the other adults who didn't come to your aid, but what I would say is that when I began to realize that the drug addiction had become a thing, when
Hmm.
I tried to alert our relatives, they were very resistant. They struggled to believe that was the case.
Hmm.
um they were really, I mean, literally, I can remember calling one of our relatives over. They came over and I talked to them in the kitchen and I was explaining to them the behaviors that I was noticing
Hmm.
that led me to believe that there is definitely a problem.
Hmm.
The in and out and all those type of things. And they really, really, and this is me at that point, I was a senior in high school, and this is me literally explaining to them, with our gas out, our gas was off. You understand what I'm saying? So this is me explaining to them, and they really still was really reticent to accept that. So I definitely understand that, but I just want you to know, I guess, like you're right. What you don't know, you don't know.
Hmm.
Of course, now that's why I really make sure I tell my kids and talk to my kids about my adult kids or whatever. But I didn't know what I could do. And when I tell you I wanted to, I like, one thing I
Hmm.
will give my ex-husband credit for, because I was like, if I was ever, if there was ever an opportunity where I would have been able to come to get you, that was going down. But um and like I've said before, like I used to drive by and just pray, like, pray for covering that, because I could only imagine what was going on. And because they were determined to, just to keep you uh,
Hmm.
secluded. Because I can remember the last time I went over there, because I hadn't been able to reach anyone. Because I would go and knock on the door. I would go
Hmm.
over there and knock over the door, and so I think I ended up calling one of his relatives, to say like, hey, I'm really, really concerned. And I'm assuming they must have ended up getting connected. So we go over there. And at this time, I actually had my son, who was an
Mhm.
infant. And we went to the house, knocked on the door, and they came to the door. And their position was, you're running my business. You're telling my
Mhm.
business. And that really wasn't it. I was just really, really concerned. But,
Mhm.
you know, this is kind of
And
heavy.
I distinctly remember those moments and the conversation coming up around people getting in the business, and people are just trying to do certain things. And looking back on it now and being where I am now and having the knowledge base of
Mhm,
what trauma looks like often is, when you are in these environments where there's so much trauma and there's so much hurt and pain and people are hurting, there is kind of like this, it almost becomes like this territorial thing, like we're going to be here with our trauma and we're not going to let anybody come in and mess that up.
mm,
And I can distinctly remember, one time you bringing some items to me, and the message was, oh, you don't need those things, we're not in that bad of a shape.
mm,
And so again, I believe that. I was like, well, I mean, I get, if you said it, and again, I'm in survival mode. I'm trying to be safe in an environment that I have no option of
mm,
escaping.
mhm,
And so uh, that's a lot of times what it feels like for people that are in trauma. It almost feels like this situation that you're never going to get out of, and nobody sees it the same way. It changes how you perceive things. And
mhm,
so I was in this insulated environment that was giving me the impression that I was okay, when really I wasn't. I never
right,
was okay. Any child that's growing up in an environment where their needs are neglected, where they're witnessing violence, where they're experiencing things that are unsafe, that's never nurturing. That's never a good environment for that child to be in. But those caregivers can almost, they're very good at making you think that you're okay in these environments. And so for a long time, as I began to get older, I just thought some of that stuff was so normal. It's just
mhm,
normal for people to do these kinds of things. And it's not until you actually get out of it that, and you begin to have different experiences and different perspectives.
mhm,
Me meeting other people and hearing about how their parents were, or how their grandparents were, or how their family members were, that was when I finally realized, oh, you know what, this was not right. This was not
mhm.
okay. But you don't often know that until you escape those environments.
That's true. That's true. Um, well, we gonna take a. That was kind of heavy. Let's kind of
Yeah,
breathe, take a
yeah.
moment. Before we get ready to pivot to the next part, I just want to say that here at Righteous Minds, one thing we will be doing during this journey is highlighting small businesses that either um, their messaging deals with wellness, mental health, holistic health, even physical health, because we're concerned about the whole body, and or their origin story aligns with wellness and being your a whole self, because that's really, really important, because there's a lot of us that are out here hurt, and there's a saying that hurt people, and so we will be highlighting some small businesses, who's going to be on the journey with us. So, with that, we're going to pivot. And Melissa shared with us her part of her journey of how we got here. How do we got to this moment? And so it's my turn. And what I will say is that, growing up in a space, an environment, where someone else experienced, it is obvious they experienced a great deal of trauma. And unfortunately, definitely in that generation, dealing either A, you kept your business, you don't let nobody know what's going on outside of this house, and or the stigma associated with mental health. You know, they didn't really know how to deal with mental health, but that doesn't negate the fact that, you know, I was on the receiving end of a lot of type different various types of abuse. You know, and I can't say it's just one thing that I think all the things that was happening definitely was getting me to on my journey to this moment. But you know, when I think about, you know, enduring abuse from babysitters, family members who were babysitters, uh, I think of and having conversations and trying to explain as a little person these things that were happening to me, and the individual, the caregiver struggling to even acknowledge what I was saying. And I think, you know, in hindsight, when I think of the stories that I've heard, the few stories that they have shared, now that I'm adult, I realize I don't think they told all of their stories. I think they told the portions that they were comfortable with revealing, which makes it far more revealing.
Mm-hmm.
And in the behaviors that they exhibited definitely speaks to there was some serious trauma that occurred. And so unfortunately I was on the receiving end, and especially you know, when you have also a person who's young with the child who has traumas, that's not always a
Mm-hmm.
recipe for a good cake. That's what I'll say.
Right.
um and I would say that when I think of the different things, other things that I experienced, you know, growing up in an environment where I was literally told that I was the bad seed. Like literally, I was set down in front of the movie, the black and white movie, The Bad Seed, to watch the movie, to watch myself
Mm-hmm.
on the movie. And I was thinking to myself as I was watching this girl do these heinous things, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
thinking to myself, I am not like that. But I would have to say that that definitely left an indelible mark, because
Mm-hmm.
I really realized that oftentimes when I think of some of the decisions I made, you know, into my teenage years and even my young adult years, were based upon me wanting to make sure people knew I wasn't a bad seed, that I wasn't a bad person, that I wasn't a horrible person like that
Mm-hmm.
individual in that movie.
Right.
Um, and you know, I think that those things definitely shape me. Um, I think that, you know, think about it. I went to over 16 schools
Mm-hmm.
in my educational career. 16 schools in different states, mind you. And I
Mm-hmm.
do understand what it's like. You could be in school one day and next thing you know, you're being told that you're being pulled out of school with no, and your attitude better be right. You
Yeah.
better be okay with it.
Mm-hmm.
I can recall, you know, having to carry the load of someone else's relationship. You know, if the relationship wasn't working, it was my fault. You know, it was because of me
Mm-hmm.
um that the relationship wasn't working. And, you know, I just think that it's just a multitude of things that occurred. And definitely when I think about the tumultuous it I think when I think of some interactions that I had as an adult in relationships, I think now, hindsight and me learning and growing, that actually I began to be attracted to those behaviors that was exhibited when I was growing up
Mm-hmm.
from my caregiver. Um, you know, definitely a person very about me, and I should be focused. My responsibility was to be focused on them and to make sure
Right.
they was okay and make sure they was, it was always about them. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that was something that I learned from my experience growing up, that you know, you want to, you know, they make a joke and they say if mama ain't happy ain't nobody happy.
Right.
Listen, 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 that's
Mm-hmm.
real.
That
You
is.
know,
Mm-hmm.
that's real. But you know, one thing about it, I mean, there's just I I know you experienced a lot, and it's just so crazy to think that we came from the same household,
Household. Mm-hmm.
but they were very different,
Mm-hmm.
and but very painful.
Yeah.
You know, growing
Yeah.
up being told that I had big lips, growing up being told that, I mean, I promise.
Mhm.
I used to walk around thinking like, oh my God, I got these humongous lips.
Mhm.
I'm so
Mhm.
serious. But as an adult, when I saw how small and tiny their lips, then absolutely my lips must
Ah,
look humongous because their
yes,
lips are
indeed.
so small.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
even with those things, I thank and praise God that his hands were still over me. And even with your situation, his hand was still over you.
Oh,
And a lot of times that's hard to say because,
mm.
ultimately we're like, why should I have to go through it?
Right.
But what I will say is that even with our traumas, I believe that the things we go through are not always just for us.
Mhm.
Um, and I really believe, there is a scripture where they talk about the Lord won't put no more than you can bear. And in a trial or in a test, in a temptation, he says he will make a way of escape. But I think that some of the things that we endure and we overcome, we come through
Mhm.
them. I think that we come through them so that we can tell somebody else that they can come
Mhm.
through it. And I
Mhm.
really honestly believe that in those instances that if we didn't overcome and if we don't share, that I believe that we could be actually jeopardizing someone who, if they only heard us say,
Mhm.
I am so sorry what you're going through, it
Yeah.
is painful, I know, and I don't want to discount your pain. However, let me share how this happened for me and how I
Yeah.
was able to get through. And if I really believe that you're able to get through. And I do think that.
Yeah.
But to go 20 years without us being in
Wow.
communication, and the crazy thing is, and I know I've never shared this with you. The crazy thing is that it was to hear that you endure what you endured is just was when I first heard it, I was baffled because actually she was happy, she wanted you.
Mhm.
I wasn't the person I wasn't the person that she wanted,
Mhm.
because I was, I came at a time when she was very young,
Mhm.
and all where you would say the world was her oyster. And so I robbed them of that.
Mm.
And I was told that often. Um, and I think that contributed to, and then the relationship that they had with my father was not good at all.
Mhm.
It was a very unhealthy, toxic relationship.
Mhm.
And I believe, they talk about the sins of the father. I believe that I became the person who was that constant reminder of, not only did I ruin their life, but I was the seed of the person who was
Mhm.
not good to them at all. And I
Yeah.
was that constant reminder of that.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yep.
Wow. 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 I mean, it almost, you're almost speechless because yeah, I'm hearing what you've been through and I'm like, "Oh my God, that's just crazy." And you're hearing what I've been through and you're like, "Oh my God, that's just crazy." And ultimately it's the same stuff, you know.
Mhm.
It's trauma.
Mhm.
It's these traumatic experiences that we were left to deal with on our own and not know how to make sense of these very painful experiences that really gave us this message about ourselves that wasn't true. And so I do have a question for you, just hearing your story, about all of these people that you had in your life, and you were trying to tell them, listen, this is not right, something has happened. What was that experience for you of people not listening to you? Because I know for me, I felt unseen, but it seems like you felt unheard.
Um, it was very hard because I can remember two vivid instances of me telling an adult about something that happened to me. Um, and you just, I think you just, I think you begin to feel like people don't care.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you don't trust adults. Like I shouldn't. Why should I really have confidence in you? Supposed to be the big person that's supposed to protect me.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember there was a babysitter who was someone who was close to, I think, to our grandmother and to our family members, and she was my babysitter, and her son was doing inappropriate things to me. I'll never forget. I was in the bathroom using the restroom, and she was making her face up, and the bathroom door was kind of cracked. And so, mind you, I'm a little girl, and I was the girly girl.
Mm-hmm.
um, and I think the son, and I'm sure he was a teenager, because when you're little, young. So I'm assuming he was probably a preteen.
Okay.
As I'm sitting there using the restroom, I look and I see him coming up the stairs, and I say to her, "Could you close the door so he doesn't see me?" That's a normal thing
Right.
that uh, a person would say, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I never forget, she took her wash rag and swung it. It was, how you get popped with a wet rag, the tip. She
Mm-hmm.
swung her wash rag and popped me with it and said, "Stop being a fast A."
Mm.
Mhm.
Wow.
Yep.
So once again, it was like a situation where you were being blamed for something that was happening with somebody else, or basically, it just sounds like people just were always blaming you for things.
Yes, I
These
was responsible for
dysfunctional,
everything.
these dysfunctional adults. Hmm.
Yep, it was, what did you do? I think the only time I was ever seen, I would say, or heard was and I'm not trying, it was one of your relatives that you never met, but
Hmm.
I was spending the night over there, and needless to say, one of your relatives who had done something with me inappropriately. Um, it was him and another one of your cousins. They put me in the room, and I had these these pants. They were yellow and white. The white were mice, but they had this button. The buttons was really, really hard to put it on or take it off. And
Hmm.
once you took it off, it was really hard for me to put it, to button myself back up.
Hmm.
Well, needless to say, they put me in there, and I'm like, I'm screaming like, "Stop, stop, stop!" And I'm trying to get out. And your one cousin, now he was like not the cousin who I was always around. Your cousins that I was always around, he was like the one who would come around.
Hmm.
So the cousins, it was one of your aunts, one of your cousins, the older girls came out and they heard me, and they're like, "What's going on?"
Hmm.
They let me go. I come out, and remember, the pants are hard to button. Now they
Right.
didn't do anything, but clearly they must have was trying to do something.
Hmm.
And I believe it was more of the one who didn't come around, leading the other one who I was around all the time, if that makes sense.
It does.
So I come out the room, and I can't, but I'm struggling to button, and that is when the
Mm-hmm.
older sister is like, "What is going on?" And it blew up, and because she was not having it. So she called her mom. She like, and I would say the biggest thing that happened was that my our uncle from our parents' brother actually dealt with him. But that
Mm.
was literally the only time that somebody, and mind you, she wasn't an adult, she was a teenager.
Wow. Wow.
She was a teenager.
Wow. Well, I appreciate how you said it made it difficult for you to trust adults, because I had a very similar experience. It was difficult for me to trust adults, but it was difficult for me to trust a lot of people. And a part of my trust issues had a lot to do with what I was being taught,
Mhm.
by the people that were taking care of me, because they didn't trust a lot of people.
Mhm.
And so they weren't going to allow anybody to come in And going back to what you said, sometimes it's generational, sometimes it's we're not going to put our business out on the street, but sometimes it's that you're not doing right, and you don't want other people to come in and see this behavior. So I said all that just to say that, we had these different experiences of trauma, but it had an impact on us that was very similar. There was,
Mhm.
a lot of insecurities, a lot of trust issues, a lot of fears. I struggle with anxiety as well.
Mhm.
Just so many. It just goes to show you how it really the trauma can be whatever it is, but
Mhm.
the impact that it has um, is usually, I mean, it's usually the same impact
Mhm.
person.
Leaving you with trying to figure out,
Mhm,
one, how do you go forward. I definitely know that I really struggled, like especially my early young adult years, being married young. The ironic thing is that for all the stuff that happened, again, I do believe God had his hand over me. Like I mean, neither one of us, think about it, we didn't get caught up in drugs,
mhm,
we didn't get caught up in alcoholism, we wasn't out in these streets sharing
mhm,
ourselves with everybody,
mhm,
don't have a slew of kids.
mhm,
I'm so impressed with the fact that what you went through as far as missing school, because of what was going on, but for you to even still finish high school, go to college, and get a master's, that is such a powerful testimony.
mhm.
You know what I'm saying? And so, our journey here, it was bumpy, it was rough, it was
Yes.
difficult, and we're still licking our wounds. But what I think about, what I'm so thankful for, is
Mhm.
that, which is the interesting thing, you like, who would have thought we would end up here? Who would
Yeah.
have thought that for us to have our trauma
Mhm.
experiences, and to have been absent from one another, separated from one another for over 20 years, to come and
Mhm.
realize that we had very similar viewpoints
Mhm.
regarding how can you be healed, how can you
Yes.
be whole. And the fact that we both really, it resonates with both of us that you can't do spiritual without handling the mental. And if you're doing mental and you saying that you are religious, you got to handle this. It's gonna go. They've got to work
Yes.
together. And
Mhm.
so, I mean, when I learned that, I was like, oh my gosh, that is just, is that something? I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah. Yeah. Because I can remember when I first became a Christian, and my decision at that stage in my life, and I became a Christian when I was 16, and going finishing up school and going to college, and I decided that I wanted to study psychology. And I can remember being in religious communities or being in church and saying, "Oh, I want to go study psychology." And people kind of looking at me and being like, "Why do you want to study psychology? Psychology is so secular. What does psychology have to do with you being a Christian? And how are you going to use that in ministry?" And I remember getting so many questions. And at that stage, I'm like barely 20 years old, and I'm like, "You're asking me some real serious questions. All I know is that I want to study psychology." And really for me it was, I want to better understand my own psychology, and figure out how I might be able to help other people with theirs, because
amen,
I knew I had some experiences that needed to be reconciled, that needed to be
amen,
dealt with. But the fact that people in church and the religious community responded the way they did, it could have discouraged me, but it encouraged me even the more. It made me
amen.
go, okay, maybe there is a need for this, because if you don't
Mhm.
think that these two things can come together, that I can't be a Christian and do psychology the way people can be Christian and do medical, and Christian and do law, then I need to really get into this,
Mhm.
because that something is missing. And so being in a religious community, what I learned is that people don't deal with their mental health. A lot of treatment is focused on, or a lot of what people tell you is you just pray about it. You pray about those things. You take those things to the Lord in prayer. You put it on the altar, you put it at the foot of the cross, all those types of things. And I can remember meeting people who were struggling at a Christian university. I went to a Christian university, and people were there struggling with their mental health. I would walk the prayer gardens, and people would be out there um, cuddled up and doing all that type of thing. And
Mhm.
I would find out that people were leaving campus and going and drinking and all of those types of things. And it didn't make sense. And while I could say, well, we're human beings, we're flawed and all of that, there
Mhm.
was something missing.
Mhm.
There was something missing. And so I'm just excited to have been able to connect with you as a minister, and to be able to get your feedback and your input on what it looks like from the spiritual community, and bringing what I have and what you have together. It's a perfect marriage.
Amen. I love that. I love that. And when I think about my spiritual journey, and I can it's so crazy because I was going to church when no one in the house was going to church. No one was telling me to go. I was so clearly I believe that God was really drawing me. But the biggest thing for me when I think about it is that I was in church and, doing going to church, going to services and everything. And I was still, I would praise the Lord, but I would still just be I'm not saying I totally have arrived and I don't have those moments, but they were a lot of moments, and of you're right. People would just say, just pray about it, just pray about it. Give me the tools. Tell me the truth. Understand what I'm saying?
Hmm.
And I realized that because I felt like a lot of times things were things were happening to me, but I couldn't look at it from a different viewpoint. I was just really, really struggling. And that's when I really began to like really kind of investigate and be like, because I know that going to a counselor was a, big stigma within our our culturally, and even from a religious standpoint.
Hmm.
But you know what? I feel like if I'm really gonna be in ministry and if I'm really want to help people, I gotta get myself together because all you're gonna do is be transferring your trash to other people.
Hmm.
The devil is a lie. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Yeah.
And so that's when I began to, I had when I lost the baby at 36 weeks. That was and don't get me wrong, I wasn't back in church at that time. But that was one of the hardest things I ever experienced. 36 weeks, I lost the baby. I had literally just heard the baby's heartbeat the day before.
Hmm.
And I went through that. I went through a lot. But
Hmm.
thanks be to God, I began to just really restudy and really learn and in that and getting that healing and getting that understanding from a mental standpoint and being I think the biggest thing we struggle with in religious areas is being honest and
Hmm.
being real with how we feel about a situation.
Yeah.
When I lost my baby, I said I was angry with God, and I was told, you don't say something like that. But here's the thing, I feel like God knows me.
Hmm.
He said the heart is deceitful and desperately wicked. Who would know? Why would I lie? Why would I pretend I'm not mad?
Right.
But
Right.
the reason why I felt like I had to say that was because then I can only get healing. I can only move forward once I admit there's a problem.
Hmm.
And so for me, I think that was a turning point in really kind of evaluating, like, how do I deal with things? I want to be honest, I want to be transparent, I want to be authentic so that I can really get to a better place where I can really say, you know what, I did X, Y, and Z along with prayer.
Right.
If that makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. Wow.
Well, it looks like we are coming to the end. You know, our journey to get to this point, it was bumpy. It was tough. But I mean, can you imagine, I mean, how awesome it is that even through the trauma that we experienced, that there's still there was still opportunity for us to get to a better place,
Hmm.
to do the work. And I think that's the biggest thing. We got to understand that it's a journey. It's a journey.
Yes.
It's not instantaneously. You got to be invested in the journey. It doesn't happen through osmosis. You
Hmm.
generally have to be really invested in the journey. So we're going to be getting ready to wrap up. We're so happy that everyone has chimed in. You know, we realized this was kind of a heavy session, but we wanted you to get to know how we got to this moment. How do we
Yes.
got to a place where we felt like righteous minds is a thing, that a space for people to come to be safe, to hear uh conversations. We plan to have experts. We don't know everything. And so what I will tell you in a minute, if I don't know something, I will find someone who will get the answer for you.
Hmm.
So I'm going to give a few nuggets, and then Melissa's going to end it off for us. It's something that she gives. I love them. But a few nuggets I want to share. I want you to think about an experience that you may have had. And what I would ask you to do is that understand that one, restoration is possible, that and it'll take work, it'll take a willingness. Forgiveness is hard, but one thing about forgiveness is that forgiveness is not always for the individual. The forgiveness can is for us, because one thing about it, when we forgive, we take it off ourselves, because
Hmm.
we're trying to hold on to, I'm not gonna let you get, guess what, because half the time when people harm you, half the time you're still thinking about it, they've moved on. And so I would just ask you to think about restoration, being
Hmm.
being to a better place, understanding that there's growth in the journey, that there's tidbits, things that we can take, and that oftentimes the bumps and lumps in our journeys, oftentimes when you overcome them and you come out of them,
Hmm.
it's for you to share with other people, to because you'd be surprised how your story will help somebody. Because oftentimes when we're in those situations, we feel like we're by ourselves. No
Yeah.
one is handling that situation the way we are. We're by ourselves. No one knows what it's like. But oftentimes you have someone come alongside you and say, like, I don't know in this moment what you're feeling like. I've had similar moments, and I was able to come through, and I'm gonna hook my arm and come alongside you until you come through.
Hmm.
Melissa.
Wow. All right. Well, I have one of my good one go do messages, and I'm just going to read it. Separation is a trauma that sadly many people are very familiar with. It started in the garden and continues to be perpetuated today and is a consequence of disobedience. Yet I believe separations are never meant to last forever because of God's gift of reconciliation. When he
Hmm.
became our sin or our trauma, he gave us the opportunity to become his righteousness. Jesus' ministry of reconciliation completely dismantled the trauma of separation for good. So, only through the ministry of reconciliation do we move from surviving into thriving. And you can find that in 2 Corinthians 5:18 to 19.
Y'all, I love her good ones. I never write it properly. I'm gonna have her write it one day, but I love her good ones. Good one, go do. So thank you so much for joining us today, Righteous Minds, and we will be back in 2 weeks. Take care. God bless. We pray for your covering and
Yeah.
protection until we see you again. Bye bye.
Bye bye.